I was standing at the end of my driveway in a faded blue bathrobe when Gloria Penwick stepped in front of a county environmental truck and raised one hand like she was stopping traffic at the gates of heaven. Two technicians in white protective suits were sitting inside with a court-authorized work order on the dashboard, and Gloria, wearing a plastic visor that said, "Standards build strong communities," told them they were not entering her street. The crew supervisor leaned out his window and said, "Ma'am, this inspection is legally authorized," and Gloria pointed her clipboard at him and replied, "Not while I am president." I remember standing there with cold coffee in one hand, watching a woman with no badge, no court order, and no actual authority try to overrule the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I almost laughed. But then I thought about everything she had done to my daughter over the previous year, and the laughter dried up pretty fast. Gloria had filed complaint after complaint against us, accused my daughter of poisoning the neighborhood, tried to shut down her business, and convinced half the street that our garage was one loose valve away from becoming Chernobyl. Every inspection had cleared us. Every accusation had fallen apart. She kept going anyway, because Gloria was not interested in safety. She was interested in obedience. What she did not know, standing in front of that truck with her clipboard pressed against her chest, was that I had filed a document with the state 6 days earlier, and once that document started moving, there was nothing she could do to stop it. My name is Mason Reed. I am 55 years old, and before all this happened, I considered myself a fairly peaceful man. I spent 32 years maintaining electrical relay systems for a regional power company, which means I learned early that panic gets people hurt, assumptions burn equipment, and the loudest person in the room is usually not the one who understands what is happening. I bought my house on Fox Hollow Court in 2010, back when the neighborhood was still a quiet row of ranch homes and split levels built along the edge of an old tobacco farm. There was no homeowners association, no monthly newsletter, no committee deciding which shade of beige counted as acceptable. People waved, borrowed tools, watched each other's dogs, and left bags of tomatoes on porches in July because everybody grew too many. Then Gloria Penwick moved into the large corner house in 2015. Gloria had the posture of a woman permanently waiting to be photographed cutting a ribbon. Her silver hair never moved, even in wind, and she wore bright scarves that somehow made every conversation feel like a board meeting. Within 6 months, she had organized a neighborhood association, drafted 27 pages of rules, appointed herself president, and printed business cards identifying her as Director of Residential Integrity. Nobody had elected a Director of Residential Integrity. Nobody had even asked for one. But Gloria understood something most decent people do not. If you act like authority long enough, tired people will eventually treat you like authority just to avoid the argument. At first, her notices were almost funny. Grass half an inch too tall, a garden hose visible from the street, a mailbox post that she described as visually inconsistent with community continuity. Most people rolled their eyes and complied because repainting a mailbox was easier than dealing with Gloria on a Tuesday afternoon. I mostly ignored her, politely but consistently, and she seemed to take that as a personal insult. The real trouble began when my daughter, Paige, moved back home. Paige was 27, recently divorced, and licensed in commercial refrigeration repair. She had spent years working for a contractor in Richmond before deciding she wanted to build something of her own. She came home with a rescue mutt named Banjo, an old white Ford service van, and enough tools to make my detached garage look like a small mechanical laboratory. She repaired restaurant coolers, grocery store freezers, and occasionally residential heat pumps, mostly off-site. The garage was where she stored equipment, completed paperwork, and worked on parts. No customers came to the house, no machinery ran late at night, and nothing hazardous was dumped anywhere. Paige was careful to the point of obsession. She labeled everything, logged every cylinder, and kept her environmental certifications in a binder that could probably survive a flood. Gloria looked at that young woman trying to rebuild her life and saw an opportunity to prove who controlled the street. The first notice arrived on a Thursday morning, tucked beneath our front door in a cream envelope stamped Fox Hollow Residential Council. It accused Paige of conducting prohibited industrial activity within residential boundaries. I wrote back calmly, explaining that Paige lived at the property, that the garage was privately owned, and that no customers or employees operated from the location. 2 days later, Gloria delivered a second notice citing the county ordinance about commercial storage structures. I looked it up that evening and discovered the ordinance had been repealed 4 years earlier. I called her the next morning. Gloria answered on the third ring and said, "Mason, I assumed you would be contacting me." I told her the ordinance no longer existed. She paused, then said, "The spirit of the law remains relevant." I said, "Gloria, that is not how laws work." Her voice cooled immediately. "Well, perhaps a formal inspection will clarify matters." That was the first time I heard the threat beneath the politeness. A month later, Paige hired a licensed environmental contractor to perform a refrigerant recovery and system flush on a damaged commercial unit. It was ordinary work, carefully scheduled, fully documented, and supervised by 2 certified technicians. Their white truck had Green Shield Recovery Services printed on the side. Gloria saw it enter our driveway, climbed into her little electric cart, and parked across the street with her phone held upright like she was filming a hostage negotiation. 20 minutes later, a county inspector arrived. Paige showed him her federal certification, disposal records, storage logs, and the sealed recovery containers. He inspected everything, asked a few questions, and left without issuing a single warning. Gloria was still sitting in her cart. As the inspector drove away, she called across the street, "This is not over." Paige looked at me and tried to smile, but I saw the strain around her eyes. She had worked hard to earn those licenses. She had already lost a marriage, an apartment, and most of her savings. Now a woman with a homemade title was trying to take the one thing she had rebuilt for herself. That night, Paige asked me whether she should move the business somewhere else. I told her no. I said, "You're not doing anything wrong. We are not teaching people that harassment works." She nodded, but I could tell she did not believe me yet. In January, Gloria issued a $175 fine for unauthorized accessory use activity, a phrase so awkward I suspected she'd spent an entire weekend inventing it. I finally read the association documents from beginning to end, all 27 pages, including the sections Gloria had copied from some other community and forgotten to change the name. The association had the right to request compliance and call meetings. It had no authority to issue fines without a formal vote of the homeowners, and no such vote had ever occurred. I did not pay. I also did not tell Gloria what I had found. Instead, I bought a spiral notebook and started documenting everything: dates, times, notices, phone calls, photographs, witnesses. 32 years in electrical systems had taught me that when a circuit keeps failing, you do not kick the panel, you trace the current. Gloria thought my silence meant fear. In reality, I was mapping the circuit, and I was getting very close to the breaker. Edit. By February, Gloria had decided paperwork was not moving fast enough, so she moved on to people. She held what she called a neighborhood safety forum in her living room, invitation only, which meant Paige and I were not invited, though our garage was apparently the evening's main attraction. Our neighbor Calvin Mercer went because Calvin was 73, retired from the Postal Service, and possessed the rare gift of looking completely harmless while remembering every word anyone said. He texted me from his truck before Gloria had finished serving iced tea. According to Calvin, she told the group Paige was running an unlicensed chemical storage operation, that our property posed a groundwater risk, and that nearby home values could fall if the county failed to intervene. Those were not vague opinions. They were specific claims about permits, contamination, and financial damage, delivered as facts to people who owned property nearby. I wrote every word in my notebook. A week later, a county zoning officer named Marcus Bell called to schedule an inspection. Marcus had the weary, careful voice of a man who spent most of his day explaining obvious things to angry people. He arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, walked through the garage, inspected Paige's storage cabinet, reviewed her licenses, and checked the sealed cylinders against county limits. Paige stood beside him with her binder hugged against her ribs, answering every question like she was taking an exam that would decide the rest of her life. After 40 minutes, Marcus closed his clipboard and said, "I do not see a zoning violation here." Paige let out a breath so quietly I almost missed it. Before leaving, Marcus glanced toward Gloria's corner house and said, "Off the record, whoever submitted this complaint used unusually technical language. It was not a misunderstanding. Somebody had researched how to make it sound serious." That evening, I called an attorney named Leonard Shaw, a property lawyer in Ashland who charged $250 for an initial consultation and spent most of the hour speaking in plain English, which made him worth every cent. Leonard confirmed the association's fines were probably unenforceable because there had never been a homeowner vote authorizing them. He also explained that selective enforcement, using rules aggressively against certain residents while ignoring similar conditions elsewhere, could become a breach of an officer's duty if the pattern was deliberate. Then, almost casually, he asked, "What does Gloria keep on her own property?" I told him I had never really looked. He said, "Maybe you should." Spring came early that year, loud with mockingbirds and lawn mowers, and Gloria installed a trail camera on a post beside her driveway, angled down the public street toward our house. The little red light blinked every time Paige's van moved. Gloria did not hide it. In fact, I think she wanted us to notice. Paige came inside one afternoon furious and asked whether we could force her to remove it. I checked the law. A camera on private property could generally record what was visible from a public road, so I told Paige we could not stop her. Then I bought one of my own. Mine faced the street near Gloria's lot, not because I wanted to play spy against spy, but because Leonard's question had stayed with me. Once I started paying attention, I realized Gloria's backyard looked like the final resting place of several bad decisions. Behind a warped privacy fence sat a rusted freezer with the door removed, 5 old propane cylinders, 2 larger gas tanks, and a weathered heating oil tank balanced on concrete blocks near a drainage ditch. The tank had dark streaks beneath one end, and weeds around the base looked thinner than the growth a few feet away. I photographed everything from the public sidewalk, calmly and legally. The camera shutter made a tiny click, but emotionally, it felt like the first time I'd stopped ducking. Gloria called an official association meeting in April and placed a motion on the agenda to censure our property for repeated commercial violations. The meeting took place beneath the neighborhood pavilion, a sagging wooden structure normally used for birthday parties and one family's yearly yard sale. Gloria arrived with color handouts, a microphone nobody needed, and the expression of a prosecutor expecting a confession. I waded through 15 minutes of phrases like neighborhood integrity and cumulative environmental exposure, then raised my hand. Gloria looked annoyed but recognized me. I asked her to identify the exact section of the governing documents that authorized monetary penalties and to provide the minutes of the homeowner vote that had approved them. She shuffled her papers, then said the board possessed implied enforcement powers. I asked where the documents said that. She told me legal language could not always be reduced to one sentence. Calvin made a choking sound that was probably a laugh. Then I asked whether the association had inspected every property for outdoor equipment storage using the same standard applied to Paige. 3 neighbors turned and looked toward Gloria's yard. The motion was tabled for legal review, which was a polite way of saying she had walked into the pavilion with a sword and discovered it was made of cardboard. But embarrassment did not make Gloria retreat. It made her meaner. In May, she filed a complaint with the state environmental agency, accusing Paige of unauthorized hazardous material handling and possible soil contamination. This inspection was more serious. Paige had to produce recovery logs, disposal receipts, cylinder inventories, training records, insurance documents, and every job ticket connected to equipment that had entered our garage. She spent 3 nights at the kitchen table sorting papers under the yellow light above the sink. Around midnight on the 3rd night, she put both hands over her face and said, "Dad, maybe she wins just because she has more time to ruin us than I have to defend myself." That sentence hit me harder than any fine or notice. I sat beside her and said, "People like Gloria count on exhaustion. They do not need to prove you wrong if they can make being right too expensive." Then I promised her we were going to finish this. Not loudly, not recklessly, but completely. The state inspector arrived the following week and cleared Paige without a single violation. Before he left, I showed him photographs of the oil tank near Gloria's drainage ditch and asked whether that arrangement deserved review. He studied the images, wrote down the address, and said another division handled residential fuel storage. I thanked him and said nothing more. Around the same time, I began speaking with neighbors. I brought copies of the actual association rules, a 6-pack of soda, and no speeches. Calvin remembered Gloria trying to remove his grandson's basketball hoop because it disrupted visual uniformity. Marlene Soto remembered receiving 3 warnings about wind chimes after she questioned an association expense report. The Nguyen family had been cited for leaving children's bicycles beside their garage, while Gloria's own yard remained untouched. 11 of the 15 households wrote statements describing enforcement actions, and nearly every case followed the same pattern. The resident had disagreed with Gloria first, and the violation came second. A former legal secretary named Ruth Donnelly helped me organize the statements by date, property, rules cited, and outcome. She tapped the finished spreadsheet with one finger and said, "Mason, this is not governance. This is retaliation with stationery." In June, Gloria filed another complaint, this time claiming Page's work van violated the county's commercial vehicle ordinance. A compliance specialist measured the van, reviewed its registration, and determined it qualified for the residential exemption because Page lived at the address and used it as her personal work vehicle. As the specialist prepared to leave, she asked whether I had any additional concerns. I handed her the photographs of Gloria's propane cylinders. She looked at the pictures, then at the complainant address on her paperwork, then back at the pictures. Her expression barely changed, but I watched the whole situation rearrange itself behind her eyes. 3 weeks later, a fire marshal's truck stopped at Gloria's house. She was cited for unsecured fuel cylinder storage and ordered to correct it. That should have been enough irony for one summer, but the real discovery arrived in a thick county envelope after a public records request I had filed and nearly forgotten. Gloria's corner lot had once held a lawn equipment repair shop, closed in the late 1990s after petroleum contamination was found in the soil. The property had later been approved for residential use based on a cleanup certificate issued by a contractor that was subsequently investigated for falsifying remediation reports. I read that page 3 times while my coffee went cold. Then I looked through the window toward Gloria's aging oil tank and the drainage ditch below it, and for the first time since this began, I understood exactly where the breaker was. I called Leonard Shaw the next morning and read him the relevant pages over the phone. He was quiet for a few seconds, then asked me to scan the entire file and send it to him. By noon, he had confirmed there was a formal process for requesting a state environmental assessment when a property had unresolved contamination history and a possible active pathway into drainage. It was not a punishment, and I want to be clear about that, because revenge was never the point. The request would simply force the right agency to determine whether the land was safe, something Gloria herself claimed to care about whenever she was pointing at our garage. Leonard prepared the filing using the county records, the old remediation certificate, photographs of the oil tank, and the fire marshal report. I signed it on a Thursday afternoon and mailed it by certified delivery. Then I drove home, put the receipt in my fireproof box, and grilled hamburgers with Paige like nothing had happened. That calm made Gloria nervous. She could handle anger because anger gave her something to, quote, something to call threatening, something she could reshape into proof that she was the reasonable one. Silence left her alone with her imagination. Over the next month, her electric cart covered more ground than a delivery truck. She visited every house, held private conversations in driveways, and posted long messages in the neighborhood social media group about residents who refused to cooperate with legitimate safety concerns. She never used our names, but there were only 15 houses, so subtlety was not exactly doing heavy lifting. Ruth saved screenshots of everything. Meanwhile, another attorney, a homeowners association specialist named Daniel Cross, sent Gloria a formal challenge to every fine she had issued against our property, now totaling $1,100. The letter demanded proof of the vote authorizing fines, records of the hearings we had supposedly been offered, and evidence that the same standards had been applied uniformly. Gloria had 15 days to respond. She responded on day 14 with 3 pages of confident language and none of the requested documents. Daniel read it and said, "This is a speech wearing a necktie. Legally, it says almost nothing." The fines were suspended. At the same time, Ruth and I used the 11 resident statements to petition for a special neighborhood meeting. Our rules required signatures from 1/4 of the owners. We had nearly 3/4. The agenda called for a vote on the fine system, a formal anti-retaliation rule, and a vote of no confidence in Gloria's leadership. When Gloria received the petition, she came directly to our house. Paige was in the driveway loading tools into her van when that electric cart stopped beside the mailbox. Gloria stepped out without her clipboard, which somehow made her seem more dangerous. She told Paige she could make everything disappear if Paige moved her business and convinced me to withdraw my complaints. Paige stared at her for a moment, then said, "So this was never about safety." Gloria's face tightened. "Do not twist my words." Paige closed the van door and said, "I did not have to. You finally said them clearly." Gloria left without another word. Daniel documented the conversation and sent a letter directing her to communicate only through counsel. The special meeting was scheduled for the last Saturday in August, as late as the rules allowed. Gloria spent the final week trying to break decorum. She went door to door saying she had devoted years to protecting property values and asking whether people really wanted to destroy the association over one family's complaints. Two households nearly stayed home. Calvin and Ruth called both, not to pressure them, but to remind them that the meeting was about everybody who had ever been singled out. On Saturday afternoon, 14 of the 15 households gathered beneath the pavilion. The missing owner submitted a proxy. The sky was low and gray, heavy with the kind of summer storm that makes the air taste metallic. Gloria arrived wearing a navy blazer over her association polo and carrying a thick binder. She had dressed for a courtroom, though she had built the courtroom herself and forgotten the jury lived next door. Calvin was elected meeting chair by 11 votes. Gloria received 2. The first vote concerned the fine system. Daniel explained that no owner vote had ever authorized monetary penalties and no proper hearing process existed. 3 families realized the fines they had paid in previous years had also been invalid. The vote to void every outstanding fine passed 13-1. Gloria voted against it with the stiff little motion of someone signing her own eviction notice. Then Calvin announced the vote of no confidence. That was when we heard the diesel engine. A white environmental services truck turned slowly onto Fox Hollow Court, followed by a state agency SUV. Conversation stopped. 2 technicians in white protective suits climbed out and began unloading sampling equipment at Gloria's corner lot. For one strange second, nobody moved. Then Gloria stood so quickly her folding chair scraped across the concrete. "I need to handle this," she said. Daniel looked up from his notes. "The meeting is still in session. You may leave, but the vote will proceed without you." Gloria looked toward her house, then at the circle of neighbors, then at Ruth's phone recording openly from the table. She sat down again. "The state had reviewed my filing and found enough evidence to order a formal assessment of the old repair shop site. The crew was there under an authorized work order to inspect the oil tank area, test the soil, and determine whether contamination remained. Gloria had spent more than a year demanding that government inspectors enter my garage. Now she was forced to sit 60 feet away while those same procedures unfolded on her property." Calvin called the vote. 11 supported her removal, 1 opposed it, and 2 abstained. Gloria whispered, "You cannot do this." Daniel slid the governing rules across the table and pointed to the removal clause Gloria herself had written. For the first time since I had known her, she had nothing to say. The testing later confirmed petroleum residue in the soil, limited but real, along with leakage from the aging tank. The tank was removed, the affected soil was remediated by a licensed contractor, and the property remained under transfer restrictions until independent testing cleared it 8 months later. Gloria resigned from every neighborhood position and sold the house the following spring. Some people said we had gone too far. Others said she had spent years using regulations as weapons and simply learned what those regulations felt like when applied honestly. I still think about that. I never wanted her home taken away, and it was not taken away. I wanted the truth examined by people qualified to examine it. Paige's business survived, then grew. She bought a second van and hired 2 young technicians who were trying to earn their first certifications. Calvin became interim president, though he insisted the title mainly meant unlocking the pavilion. The new rules required open votes, independent hearings, and written protection against retaliation. By the next summer, children's bicycles were leaning beside garages again. Wind chimes were hanging from porches, and bags of tomatoes started appearing at front doors. That may sound small, but after years of people lowering their voices whenever an electric cart approached, normal felt almost miraculous. So tell me what you think. Did I protect my daughter and expose a dangerous hypocrite? Or did I cross the line by turning Gloria's own methods back on her? Would you have filed the environmental request, or walked away once the fines were defeated? Leave your judgment in the comments. Share this story with someone who has dealt with a neighborhood bully. And subscribe, because sometimes justice does not arrive with sirens or shouting. Sometimes it comes quietly, in a certified envelope, signed for at the door.